It was 1776 when the founders signed the writ of independence from the Brits. It was revolution. Now an enemy from within would enslave us all again and deprive us of our rights in the Constitution. Restore the Republic. Wake up, it's time to understand. Restore the Republic. We're losing our freedom in the land.
Ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you and welcome you to the RNN News Network, the Republic News Network. Tonight we are doing a shortened introduction due to technical difficulties. I'd like to introduce the Connecting the Dots show with Dan Happel. Mr. Happel, I yield the floor to you, sir.
Thank you, Kelby. Tonight we've got a terrific couple of guests here. Alex Newman is the foreign correspondent, international correspondent for the New American Magazine. He's also a very accomplished writer and author, has authored several books, and he is a very knowledgeable man about a lot of the things that are going on in our world today. And with him will be a returning guest who we've had on our show before, and that's Debbie Bacigalupi. And Debbie is someone that's equally accomplished in her realm as a very staunch fighter against the anthropogenic global warming scam known as climate change. And both of these folks were at the COP21 conference in Paris in December and had an opportunity to meet one another and work together on some of the discussions there. And we just felt like this would be a terrific show to bring both of them on to talk about what we are experiencing in America today and in Europe, and that is the destruction of our civil culture, our religious background, our Christian basis, and our entire political system through a process of radicalization, immigration, and also the introduction and the use of climate change scares through environmentalism. And let me open this with the comment that I would like to use, and this is a quote from Edward Bernays, who was the nephew of Sigmund Freud, and he was also the author of a 1928 book called Propaganda. And incidentally, Goebbels and Hitler used his book to outline much of the stuff that they did in Nazi Germany in the 1930s and through the end of the war. So let me have a quote from Edward Bernays' book, Propaganda. And this is it. Quote, "The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested largely by men we have never heard of. It is they who pull the wires that control the public mind," unquote. And that is what's known as, in parlance of the psychology of the Hegelian dialectic, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. And that's, in simpler terms, problem, reaction, solution. We have people in our country that create a scenario, then they create the solution to solve that scenario, and they end up accomplishing things that would have been impossible had they not used that psychology in that process. And with that, I would like to open this discussion about how terrorism in Europe has been used as a Trojan horse to increase the likelihood of martial law and laws that restrict privacy, and how that's impacting Europe at this point, and then we'll move on to the United States. Alex, would you like to address that, please?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I think all of this is related. An excellent introduction there. I think what people need to understand is exactly what you explained with the problem, reaction, solution, because that's exactly what we've seen over and over again, and that's exactly what we're seeing right now with the so-called refugee crisis. You have to understand, first of all, the same globalists who are exploiting this crisis are actually the same ones who created it. Look at the countries that these people are fleeing from, at least what we're being told, right? They're leaving from Libya, which of course was bombed to smithereens by the Obama administration under the guise of enforcing a UN resolution. He never went to Congress. He didn't even ask or even tell them. He just went on television and said, "Hey, UN passed a resolution. I'm going to go bomb Libya because I said so, and NATO's going to help me out." So not even a pretense of legitimate authority to do that. Same thing in Syria. They didn't actually, overtly bomb it, although now they've been doing that, but they started supporting al-Qaeda jihadists and Muslim Brotherhood operatives. And, we have the documents from the Pentagon now as far back as 2012 that they realized, that they understood that this so-called revolution was being led by al-Qaeda types and the Muslim Brotherhood. They said so themselves, and they supported it anyway. They actually said they wanted a Salafist principality in eastern Syria. Now, of course, that principality exists today. It's called the Islamic State, or ISIS. So they destroyed Iraq, they destroyed Syria, they destroyed Libya, they destroyed Afghanistan, they destroyed a number of other African nations. Ivory Coast is one that comes to mind, where they backed Islamic militias. The UN helped bomb all of their opposition, and then they installed a Muslim central banker for president, and they, on the way to the capital, they butchered tens of thousands of Christians with machetes. So, of course, people are fleeing from there. And so you have all these countries where the globalist establishment, the UN types, the Obama administration types, the European Union types, just literally destroyed countries. Just if you saw pictures of Libya before and after, or Syria, I think you would understand what I'm talking about here. These were, maybe it wasn't the United States, maybe it wasn't Paris, but these were functioning countries. And at this point, they look like big piles of rubble with dead bodies and bullet holes and, all the buildings bombed to smithereens. So they did this very strategically, and then they said, hey, we're going to open up the borders. Anybody who feels like making it to Europe, just come on ahead. Sweden, for example, the Swedish government said, oh, any Syrian who makes it to Sweden can have instant permanent residency permit. So what do you suppose happened? Well, millions of people set off in the direction of Europe, some Syrian, some not, right? A whole bunch of people just threw away their passports and either bought fake Syrian passports along the way or just claimed to be Syrian when they arrived. And so that now we have this situation where we have millions of so-called refugees. Some of them are real refugees. The vast majority are not. Flooding into Europe and into the United States, right? They're being imported here deliberately by the Obama administration. And as a predictable result, anybody could have told you this would happen. You're going to have an increase in terrorism. You're going to have an increase in jihadism, and you're going to have more problems like that. As we saw, for example, just recently in Paris, 500 casualties, over 130 people massacred with machine guns and bombs in a jihadist terrorist attack in Paris. Now, they knew this was going to happen, obviously. Shortly before that, they had massacred all these people from the magazine. And so we get the same predictable response. What do we get? More attacks on liberty, more attacks on privacy. They're even calling for more gun control, believe it or not. I don't know how you could have more gun control in France, but they said now we need European Union level gun control, since apparently the guns were smuggled from Germany, where they're also illegal. So, it's just a never-ending cycle. Now they say they need a European Union intelligence agency. They're using that as an excuse to build up a European Union border agency and a European Union Coast Guard and a European Union military. They're also using it to advance the agenda of a Middle Eastern Union. Several years ago, the Council on Foreign Relations, which is, of course, one of the big globalist institutions, they put out papers saying we need a Middle Eastern Union. And, of course, now we see this refugee crisis being used to advance that exact same agenda. You have people like George Soros. You have people like the German finance minister, Wolfgang Schäuble, saying now we need a new Marshall Plan, right? And, of course, the Marshall Plan was a tool whereby the globalists used American tax money to unify Europe into what eventually became the European Union. So now they want to do a rerun of that, only using European tax money to build up a Middle East union. So, it's the same tired plan they've used over and over again. It's, Europe is going to see a lot more problems before this is all over. According to, the official refugee statistics from the Red Cross, from the United Nations, 3/4 of the so-called refugees entering Europe are military-aged males. Now, any men listening to this program, think about that. Would you leave your wife and your kids in a war zone to go apply for refugee status in a safe country? Sorry, but that's ridiculous. Nobody would do that. So something else is going on here. The Prime Minister of Hungary, I think, put it very eloquently in a speech a few months ago. He said, really the agenda here of the internationalists, of the globalists, is to destroy national sovereignty, to destroy the nation state, to undermine the Christian foundations of Western civilization, and to undermine Western civilization for the purpose of advancing internationalism, or globalism, as Donald Trump calls it. And that's exactly what's going on here. It's so transparent at this point. And, yeah, you won't find that on the front page of the New York Times or the Washington Post, but it's what's happening. It's very easy to document. It's not a secret. The UN refugee czar, Goldman Sachs guy, Bilderberg Steering Committee guy, Peter Sutherland, he said it openly. He said, what's going on here is we're getting rid of borders. We need to get rid of these illusions and shibboleths of national sovereignty, and we need to realize that we're all one big family. And, if you take it the next step further, well, who created the nations, right? Well, God created the nations. So what we have here is a very sinister agenda at work, and it's very transparent what's going on, and we need to stop it.
Well, I think that is also something that would lead into the next discussion item that I would like to have Debbie address, and that is talk about the use of how radical environmentalism is being used to deindustrialize the United States and Europe through all the regulations that are coming through agencies like the EPA and their equivalent in Europe. Would you like to kind of follow up on that, Debbie?
Well, yeah, and if I can add to what Alex just said, the United Nations, who is, I would say, the mouthpiece for all this radical environmentalism, leading into a global governance system of protecting the environment, has and Alex probably knows about this, has a document that is called replacement migration. And so what their plan is for this replacement migration is to take older communities or aging communities like the United States, where you're running out of farmers and ranchers who they say are aging. And in order to keep this society going, we must have younger people planted, if you will, into that society, productive people, so that they can support the aging community. So this is why we see this is another excuse for them for the influx of refugees into distributing people all over, mostly in white Christian nations, is where you see the influx of refugees happening. So, and that is also part of their diversity plan. But what we're experiencing as ranchers and farmers in the United States is a radical environmentalism to, infiltrate how we independent people would live our lives, not relying on government, not relying on others, but being independent, sovereign people in a nation that used to value independence and sovereignty. But with the United Nations at the helm of protecting the environment, we see the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, the Department of Interior, the USGS, the United States Geological Survey, adopting the United Nations agenda for sustainable development. Even in their own documents, they admit that they are using Gru Harlem Brundtland, or the Brundtland Commission's definition on what sustainable development is for the 21st century, which, and I'm sure, Dan, you have one of the most advanced audiences out there who understand that something's not right. Something's changing in America. Private property is not valued by our government as it should be. I was just at a health conference over the past couple of days, and everywhere, all the most important areas of our life, whether it's our health, our food, our children, when it comes to education, our homes, when it comes to mortgages. Now, the federal government is in control of all of that, and that was never to be the case. And when it comes to private property and being a rancher and a farmer, what Alex and I both saw at the United Nations or at the Paris conference was this nudge to, and Alex, jump in at any time if you want, but this nudge towards maintaining the Earth's temperature by 1.5 degrees Celsius. So I think that's 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Because of radical environmentalism, we must be aggressive to save a dying planet. And it was extraordinary to be there with Alex to see, what was happening at the Paris conference, which the only way, Dan, that we're going to maintain the Earth's temperature by 1.5 degrees Celsius is to live a sustainable development lifestyle. A sustainable development lifestyle is anything. Human beings will live in what they call sustainable communities, smart communities, mega cities, mega regions, because in the built world, in the vertical world, we are more sustainable than in the horizontal world where we, use and rely on the natural resources. So I hope that adds to the conversation.
Well, actually, it does. And the thing that I'm really astounded with is how quickly they have implemented Agenda 21 policies. Considering that it was never approved by the Senate, it was never ratified, and yet now we see virtually every federal agency utilizing the sustainable development criteria that was developed under Agenda 21. And the thing that's most worrisome about that whole thing is the fact that private property is number one target of Agenda 21. They absolutely believe that private property is something that's unsustainable, and without private property, we have nothing as a country. I mean, that's a cornerstone of our American Republic.
Yep, absolutely it is, and so good to hear from you again too, Debbie. And if I could just add, one thing onto there, one of the important things for people to understand too is that it's all based on a hoax. I mean, it was just amazing to see these people in Paris talking about maintaining the Earth's temperature at 1.5 degrees, like they had any idea what the temperature would do if you added a little bit of CO2 or subtracted a little bit of CO2. They don't have the first clue, and any honest scientist will tell you that. Even the global warmists, well, you ask them, well, how much is the temperature going to change if we double the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere? They have no idea whatsoever. So the fiction that by enslaving the Western world, building a global government, regulating and taxing carbon dioxide emissions, and you remember that's your breath. Every time you exhale carbon dioxide. Everything you do produces carbon dioxide. So the fiction that creating this global institution to regulate and tax carbon dioxide emissions is going to maintain Earth's temperature increases by below 1.5 degrees is so absolutely ridiculous. It goes right back to what you were saying at the beginning of the program, Dan, this propaganda. They're manipulating people's minds in such a brazen and such a blatant way. I mean, even the global warming scientists, even the alarmists who actually believe this stuff, wouldn't purport to understand, how much the temperature will rise or will not rise based on, X amount of CO2 emissions. They have no idea. And, even the top Obama administration officials who believe the global warming theory have admitted as much. So we have basically a fraud piled on top of a fraud piled on top of a fraud, and I think that's one of the bright spots in all of this. It's such a gigantic hoax that really, once people see the truth, the whole entire edifice will collapse, and it will extend way beyond the global warming hoax and the sustainability hoax. I think once people realize the extent of the deception that was involved in this, I think faith in the establishment will just completely crater, and I think it will set back their credibility by decades, by generations. And, so I think that's really excellent tool that activists have at their disposal here. Let's expose the global warming hoax. Let's expose the agenda here. And, I think we have a very good chance of restoring our liberties if we can do that.
Well, I kind of think that the fact that for the last 14 years the global temperature's actually been declining rather than increasing, how do they explain that?
Well, they don't, actually. It's been amazing to see this because, the satellite record shows 18 to 21 years of absolutely flat temperatures. The weather balloons show, potentially 50 years of flat temperatures. Some indicators actually suggest that the Earth has cooled and might cool further. And so their explanation is basically, I think at last count they had 100 and something excuses for this. The Obama administration's preferred excuse was the ocean ate my global warming, is what I call it. It's this theory that all the global warming is hiding somewhere deep in the oceans, some mysterious thing.
Mm-hmm.
And of course they have no evidence for this. They have no data showing any warmth in the ocean that wasn't there before. Yeah, we have El Nino this year, but that's dissipating. And, it's just ridiculous. But we did find out from the Associated Press and leaked documents that the Obama administration had pressured the United Nations, the IPCC, specifically the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This is their pseudo-scientific global warming body. To include this theory, the ocean ate my global warming, as the excuse for why we have had no actual global warming in 18 to 21 years, which is, of course, a period during which humans have released a lot of CO2 emissions. And, I don't have any problem with that. I think CO2 emissions are great. It's great for the plants. Earth is starving for CO2, is what many, many good scientists have told me. So for me, this is a great thing. But, it leaves the global warmists and the climate change nuts in a conundrum because they can't explain it. And so they use names, they come up with silly theories like the ocean ate my global warming, and then the Obama administration pressures the UN to include that as the official justification. But the fact is they have no idea.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right. One of the things that strikes me as funny is how people like Donald Trump, the presidential primary election and all that is a lot of what's happening to carry Trump forward is the fact that there's no faith in the system anymore, because regulators and politicians have been at the heart of this thing, and there's absolutely no credibility in anything they do anymore. Debbie, would you kind of talk about some of the stuff that's going on in on the West Coast with the immigration that's going on there, and how that's creating kind of some problems in the California area that are similar to what's going on in Europe?
Well, we're seeing an influx of people from the South, as well as I know that in the Midwest there have been reports of refugees coming into rural America, whether it's Montana, Idaho, Wyoming. There's been an influx of people. But what we're experiencing here in California is mostly an influx of people from Mexico and coming in. And in fact, politicians here in California, the woman I ran against in 2012, Jackie Spear, had stated at one point that she believes that even 16-year-olds should be allowed to vote. So what we see happening in California is the Jerry Brown administration trying to lessen what it takes for people to vote here in California. And I think it is absolutely to change our system forever into a system, a system where the Democrats will rule forever. And I say that with a little bit of caution because, as you both know, that this is not a left-right issue. This is an American freedom issue, because both the left and the right are responsible for where our country is today. But I would say with immigration and regionalism, California and the Bay Area was regionalized, like Hitler did at one point, into the One Bay Area plan. It's now called the 2040 plan. Why is that important, and what does that have to do with immigration? Well, the 2040 plan, or regionalism, it dissolves borders, city, county, and even state borders eventually. So the Bay Area was regionalized back in 2013 by a group called the Association of Bay Area Government. It doesn't matter where you are in the United States. it is likely that your local government is being run by what we call a council of government, which is accepting federal funds. So really it's the federal government who is controlling what happens to our housing, to our planning, to our zoning, to our schools. In fact, I don't know if you all heard today, but Senator Lee's bill to stop HUD and the low-income housing, which is completely unconstitutional, got thwarted, and so now we have, and this is part of regionalism, and you both feel free to jump in and help define this. It's a big problem. It's they're using low-income housing to create this diverse community, as well as bringing the influx of immigrants, even illegal immigrants, to create a world that's based on diversity. And what we're seeing here in California is the mega regions, the mega cities, where the nexus of power is in what they call city-states like you see in Singapore with seats at the United Nations table, is and what happens is your vote eventually disappears. And with the influx of immigrants and being able to vote, our votes as American citizens, as sovereign citizens, is disappearing very quickly. The next step is to regionalize Southern California. And why is this one going to be tricky, like they did the One Bay Area where they dissolved city-county borders? Because in the Southern California region, it overlaps into Mexico. And the goal, Dan, as you know, is to regionalize the United States of America into 11 regions where our regions overlap. You'll have the North American Union. You will have the sovereignty of the United States of America will disappear, and it's happening right now.
Well, you know, I think part of the discussion on that, it leads right back to what Alex was talking about, and that is a total dissolution of the nationhood idea and getting rid of the borders between nations. And that regionalization accomplishes that, and it does it in a way where the vote or the voice of the individual is completely nullified, and you get all these appointed boards and all these appointed regional controllers, or, you know, let's go on up to the UN. And all the elected officials just kind of disappear or become irrelevant. Alex, that's happened in Europe with the EU, and you can kind of see how that's transferring now into the United States.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the European Union, for all intents and purposes, is now a super federal government. It is essentially unchallengeable. You know, what's going on with the Brexit right now is interesting, but essentially 80% or more of the laws that govern the lives of Europeans are concocted in Brussels by unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats, and there's no way to remove these bureaucrats. There's no way to undo what they have done, and that's come here to the United States. And actually, both regionalization agendas are actually one and the same. You know, this agenda to abolish nation states and create these super regions, the European Union, of course, being the model, but we have the African Union. Putin is building his Eurasian Union. In South America, the communists have built what they call the Union of South American States. It's meant to be kind of a rerun of the old Soviet Union. And just the other day in the New York Times, last month, a guy who lives in Singapore, born in India, also lived in Arabia and in Germany. His name is Prag Khanna. He's with the Council on Foreign Relations. He's with the European Council on Foreign Relations and a number of other these globalist so-called think tanks. He openly outlined an agenda to abolish America's states. It's called A New Map for America. I encourage everybody to go out and read it because you'll get a lot of insight as to what these people intend to do. I mean, they're basically telling us openly now, so we need to get rid of this, he called states antiquated, this antiquated political system based on 50 states. And what we need to replace it with is super regions based around major metropolitan areas. So he wanted to divide the United States up into 7 super regions, and then he wanted to create, his words, not mine, a North American Union. And so Detroit would be right between this super region that would encompass Chicago, and I forget what he called it, the middle corridor of the North American Union or something, and Toronto. And it's just open and in your face now. And just a few years ago, I went back and looked at what the New York Times had said about the North American Union. They said, oh, that's a silly conspiracy theory, and anybody who believes that is kooky and silly. And now they're touting it openly in the pages of their newspaper. Of course, there's no retraction. There's no apology for the lies that they printed in 2007 when they said there was no such thing. We happen to know for a fact now, thanks to WikiLeaks, that the U.S. Embassy, the U.S. government, and the Canadian government were working on a plan to build a North American Union with a North American Parliament, with a North American currency, and a North American central bank. We know this. We have the documents. And yet the New York Times does not apologize for tossing out names and ridiculing people who pointed this out. So the agenda is very much out in the open now if people care to look. And it's extremely dangerous. I mean, what Debbie was saying is so important. We are losing our right to self-government. If we don't get to vote for the people who are supposed to represent us and make the laws, which is where this is all going, we are essentially serfs. This is the kind of political system that our ancestors fought so hard to leave behind, and it's coming again. And if we don't do something about it, it's going to be not to sound alarmist, but a very unpleasant experience, I think, for not just our children and our grandchildren, but potentially in our lifetimes. It's, serious business, and we need to get busy putting a stop to it unless we want to, surrender our liberties, surrender our country, surrender our right to self-government and our national independence.
Well, I think you're right, Alex, and I think that what we're moving into could potentially, if we lose the freedoms that were the cornerstone of our constitutional Republican system of government, if we lose those freedoms, I believe that we'll be moving into a new dark age, and I believe it'll rival the dark age that came after the fall of the Roman Empire. Guys, we're going to take a short break here. Kelby, I'll turn it over to you, and we'll be back in just a few minutes. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I listened to our guest tonight on the call, and as hard for it was for people to believe that there was a North American Union in 2007, it's just as difficult in 2016 for people to believe that there's actually a re-inhabited republic. There is, in fact, two law forms on this land. And what we did is step back into the de jure law form that was vacated under Lincoln in 1861. Our site, republicfortheunitedstates.org, for some strange reason, we are up to several thousand hits every single day, and we had some malware Trojans placed onto the website. They should be cleared up hopefully by tomorrow. Our techs are working on the back end to get the site cleared up for people to view. But on the home screen of the website, we do have what we would call a declaration of sovereign intent. And this is where the people, tens of thousands of people across the country in 2010 came together with their re-inhabited Congress and voted and re-inhabited this de jure nation, giving you guys an answer. And so, again, it's hard for people to understand. It's hard for people to believe, but it's all throughout the federal rules of regulation, and it's in the codes and statutes of this great nation. And so we encourage you to participate at the local, state levels by re-inhabiting the counties, the municipalities, and the states of your region. So please come to our website, and you will find that Wednesday evenings we do hold a Building the States call, and it's for anybody. It's an open call. We show you how to sit back down, assemble, and put this nation back together piece by piece, city by city, municipality by municipality, and state by state, so that we can actually hold the de jure seats and re-inhabit this nation. And that way the New World agenda will not be coming onto our land and or finishing what their attempt is. And it's not just an attempt, guys. These guys that are speaking are absolutely telling the truth. Everything in law is in place. They are now just making the moves. Dan, I yield.
Okay, thank you, Kelby. All right, let's make that connection between the transfer of our industrial sector to China and to the third world countries of the world, and how that is, in effect, transferring our wealth to, for the most part, Marxist or socialist countries all over the world. And in the interim, as a consequence of that, we are losing our independence as a sovereign free nation and as a constitutional republic. And Debbie or Alex, either one of you, please step in there and kind of explain how you see that happening.
You want to go ahead, Debbie?
Well, I would, as you were saying, bringing that up, Dan, what I thought of was Edenhofer, Dr. Ottmar Edenhofer's quote. He is with the United Nations Environment Program. He's part of the International Panel on Climate Change, which Alex mentioned earlier. And he is quoted, I think it's in 2010. It's 2010 or sooner. And he is quoted as saying that this is not about the environment anymore. It's not about environmental policy anymore. This is about wealth redistribution. And so they're using climate policy, in other words, the climate policies that they're coming up with have nothing to do with the environment. It has everything to do with wealth redistribution. And if I understood your question correctly, here's my take on developing countries and how they're being used in this sustainable development agenda. According to the 2030 agenda, which is the stepping up. When I was at the 2012 Rio Earth Summit, Maurice Strong was there. He's since passed. He's considered the father of Agenda 21. And Maurice Strong had a button on his, he was wearing a button on his jacket. And you can look this up online, and it's hard to find, but you can see that Maurice Strong, I showed the picture in my presentation, and you can see that it says Step Up Agenda 21. Step it up. When you step something up, it means that you make it happen faster. Well, what they did in New York at the United Nations headquarters back in September 2014, Putin, Xi from China, John Kerry, the United Nations, the Pope, they all gathered at the United Nations headquarters in New York City to implement or to agree with what is called the 2030 Agenda. The 2030 Agenda would be used, the 2030 Agenda is all about sustainable development. And that sustainable development, those goals, those targets, which there are 169, will be used to implement the Paris Accord to maintain the Earth's temperature by 1.5 degrees. I'm going to sum this all up by saying the only way that they can force us, the whole world, into living a sustainable development lifestyle is to have us all interconnected. We are one, and Alex mentioned it earlier, we are one global system, like one global happy family, and we're all interconnected through technology, through our smartphones, where they can monitor, control, and surveil all aspects of human life. Because like Alex said, this is about, that every human action must be integrated, must be implemented into saving planet Earth. China is being used with a cap and trade system, and they have recently agreed to do a cap and trade scheme, as Al Gore admitted because of the Paris conference. I just watched a video of Al Gore at this global conference that was given in Anaheim, where the cost for this Milken Global Conference was, per person, the least expensive cost to get into this conference was $12,500 per person, then $15,000, then $25,000. And what they talked about was transhumanism, artificial intelligence, sustainable development, global warming, climate change, controlling our food systems, moving us away from meat intake into new synthetic forms of food, all the way into just craziness. But anyway, it's to move us all into a one system, and I hope I explained that well enough.
Oh, you did very well, Debbie. And the thing that we need to understand is that this system that they're talking about is a Marxist, socialist system that's controlled by a very small elite that will control the whole process worldwide. And Alex, would you like to talk about how they're doing that and how they've accomplished that so much in Europe?
Sure. Well, essentially what they did in Europe is very much what we're seeing them do right now here in the United States. They basically lied to the people, right? And, you know, lying is their stock and trade. It seems like all they know how to do is lie some more. And they said, hey, we just want some free trade, right? We just love free trade. And so if we just allow the creation of this European free trade agreement and this European community, then we'll all trade freely and we're all going to be much richer and we'll be freer, and then we'll have the added benefit that we won't have wars. And, you know, anybody who pointed out what was really happening was dismissed as a conspiracy theorist or a kook or, you know, nuts or any of these other ridiculous terms that the globalists like to throw out there in their propaganda organs to try to ridicule and marginalize the people who point out their crimes. But, you know, the New American Magazine in 1989 published an article, The United States of Europe, showing exactly where this was going to go. And at the time, oh, that's conspiracy theory. No, they're not going to do that. This is just about free trade. And what they did very quietly and over time was build up this transnational government, and now they openly brag about it. Now they openly tell us this is going to be the United States of Europe. We're going to have a European constitution, and we'll let the slaves vote on it. Oh, the slaves voted no in France and Holland. Well, we'll just rename it the Lisbon Treaty, and we'll ram it down their throats anyway. So that's exactly what we're seeing, and unfortunately we're seeing that now with the United States as well. We have, for example, these two massive so-called free trade agreements. One is the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The other is the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. And both of these are aimed at creating regional supergovernments above and beyond the control of the American people. So the TTIP, which would be with the European Union, would merge the United States and the European Union under this regional regime. You're going to have regional bureaucracies to set standards and regulations. You're going to have regional courts to enforce these bureaucracies' dictates and edicts. And the same thing with the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which would be with some of the governments along the Pacific Rim, including the communist dictatorship in Vietnam. Senator Jeff Sessions called this a Pacific Union. And he said basically that you're creating a European Union-style government to rule over the United States and the other governments that are involved in this. So they kind of bypassed, I mean, the guy who came up with this North American Union idea, Robert Pastor from the Council on Foreign Relations, he passed away, and in his book before he died, he blamed the mean old John Birch Society for foiling his silly little North American Union plans. But, of course, the globalists don't give up easily, right? So they decided maybe that if they can't go and get their North American Union outright, they'll just bypass that step and merge the United States with the European Union and with these Pacific nations. And, of course, that's not a new agenda, right? One of the things that we did, Rick Biondi and I, in the book World Federalism 101, we just took their own words and their own deeds straight from the congressional record and showed that, you know, in the 40s, after the war, in the 50s and the 60s, it was openly admitted that the plan was to create a federal government above and beyond the United States government to incorporate the Europeans and the United States under one transnational government, and eventually to use that as the nucleus for a global government. Back then, again, it was in the open. They passed resolutions in Congress for this. When they adopted the Marshall Plan in 1951, they explicitly said the purpose of this is to help unify Europe economically and politically. And so we're now seeing the kind of culmination of all of that. You have the world being divided up into these regional governments. Every country is expected to give up its national sovereignty and be ruled by this global system. And, of course, Agenda 2030 that Debbie was talking about is going to be a crucial part of this, right? It's kind of the roadmap for how this global system is going to operate. And they were very clear. You know, for once, I have to give them credit for honesty. They told us what they're going to do. They're going to be redistributing wealth at the national and the international level, right? They're going to reduce inequality. They're going to make sure that economic resources are equally shared by all. They're going to make government-run health care, right? Everyone's going to have a right to government health care, which, of course, you know, a right to government health care doesn't mean a lot when there is no health care to be had. They told us they're going to go after the children, right? They called, in this document, they call children agents of change who are going to use their infinite capacities for activism to help build this wonderful Agenda 2030 world. They're going to legalize abortion everywhere, right? Everybody's going to have a right to reproductive services. And, of course, they have the whole education component, right? They tell us right in there what they're planning to do. They're going for the children. They're going to brainwash the children to believe in, and they tell you this explicitly, sustainable development.
Yep.
And human rights. And, human rights sounds like a great term, of course, but what the United Nations means by human rights is basically the opposite of what the founders meant with, the God-given rights that they refer to in the Declaration of Independence that are endowed to each person by their creator. These are natural, inalienable rights, the right to speak freely, the right to keep and bear arms, the right to a trial by jury, the right to property, the right to life. What the United Nations means is things like, they use human rights to say that we need to give up our guns. They use human rights to say that we need to give up our free speech and give up our freedom of the press and censor the Internet. So we have a very big problem here. And actually in Article 29 of their Declaration of Human Rights, they tell you explicitly none of these rights or privileges may ever be used contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations. So, this is a gigantic fraud here. But it's coming, right? And, one of the good things that we have on our side, and I know it sounds all doom and gloom, and it's really not. If we go look at the global warming hoax, for example, you have just 40% of Americans believe this hoax. So we have a lot of things going for us. I think there's an awakening in this country. But you're right. Well, the attack on sovereignty, the erosion of sovereignty is accelerating, and it's coming out more in the open. So I think now we're really just in a race against time, right? Are the American people going to wake up before the trap is completely closed, or are we just going to, keep sleepwalking and paying attention to, reality TV and these things while this all happens and it gets too late? So I'm optimistic, but, it's something that we do need to get busy on.
Well,
I'm Debbie Downer. I'm Debbie Downer, Dan.
Okay, well, and I am too, to a certain extent. I agree, and Debbie, I'd like to get your take on that too. But I was going to mention the fact that the UN Declaration of Human Rights is virtually word for word identical to the Soviet Union's 1936 Constitution delineation of human rights under that Constitution. It's literally a direct takeoff of that. And that's pretty frightening. And that Debbie Downer, tell us what you think about that.
Well, I do know that I've read the Earth Charter, the United Nations Earth Charter, which is to replace the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, but to even more importantly to me, the Ten Commandments, that it replaces our God-given natural rights to a system where our rights are based on nature and how man defines nature. Not how God created nature, but how we are interpreting nature to the point where, when going back to one of your very first questions for me about how radical environmentalism is impacting our, is playing a role in this, where the environment, one of the 3 E's of sustainable development, there's social equity, economic justice, and environmental justice. This is another way to say environmental justice is rocks have rights. And there are attorneys now in the United States who are representing the voice of the animals, the voice of Mother Nature, because we human beings are so supposedly destructive to Mother Earth. Well, I don't know about you all, but God put me in place of being a great steward of the land. As a cattle rancher, I can tell you we take great care of our property. We rely on our property. And I think that most Americans would feel this way about their own private property. As I go around the country and speak at different in different venues, I ask people what private property is, and I go about it like asking them, when you rent a taxi or when you rent a car, do you return that car better than you found it? And most people say, 99% of the people say no. When you go to fill it with gas, do you put the best, cleanest, most expensive gas in that car? No, you put the cheapest. But when it comes to your own private property, your body, the thoughts in your head, what you do with the thoughts in your head and what you create with your hands, it's your private property. It's your creation, and we treat it completely different than in most cases than we would something that was given to us, something that the government gave to us. So, my thought on all of this is the most sustainable future is that future which gives people their individual rights, props individuals up, encourages people to be better to, the environment, better to each other, take care of that rental car even though it's not yours, and create and manifest and be God's children of this earth. And I'm kind of getting silly here, but what I see happening is us losing that individual spirit. And I see people walking around just, calling us democracy and being irresponsible with our language and with our moral values. And to me, this is all a product of what this whole one world governance system is all about, because it's not about being an individual, and it's not about freedom, and it's not about liberty. Mm-hmm. It's about being a product of the government, a product of an oligarchy, of a dictatorship, of technocracy, and and we've got to get back to our moral compass. Even if United Nations uses this thing called, oh gosh, I just forgot it. It's like the precautionary principle, but it's not. It comes to oh shoot, I can't remember it, but they use it to say, what is the worst thing that can happen when it comes to believing in God? And they use this in reference to climate change. So if we are to mitigate climate change, what is the worst thing that could happen? We could possibly save planet Earth. And they also use that in the same way with God, I think, to reach the Christians and to say, what's the worst thing that could happen if someone believed in God? And so they use and manipulate our God-given rights, and have taken our Constitution and the Bible, and I think they've flipped it on its head. And like Alex is saying, I do have hope. My hope is that more and more people see that something is not quite right in America. Something is wrong. And that awakens them to find and dig deeper and deeper. And they will end up exactly where we all have ended up with, which is, this big global plan called Agenda 21, the 2030 Agenda, and technocracy.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And people really kind of don't realize that Mikhail Gorbachev, who was the last Soviet premier, and he was a communist, and he was a very outspoken communist, although he was, kind of like Mandela, he was one of the, considered one of the more kind-hearted communists, but communists are communists in my mind. He was the lead author of the Earth Charter, and he was also the founder of Green Cross. And, that tells me how closely collectivism and communism is tied into environmentalism. I mean, they're one and the same, and I think that the radicalization of Europe and the takeover of the government there is very noteworthy, because it all leads to collectivism. It all leads to a one-world system that is controlled completely and takes away all private property rights. And I think Americans and Europeans need to understand this isn't a game. This is for the whole enchilada, and we really need to do something about it. And Alex, I wanted to mention, you had an article, and I thought it was terrific. Viktor Orban, who is the Prime Minister of Hungary, spoke very openly about how the collectivization and the radicalization and all the things that were going on in Europe was designed to kill Christianity in Europe and to promote the New World Order. Would you kind of talk about that? Because they went after him with a vengeance when he brought that up.
They did, and it's interesting, actually. He had a scholarship from Soros, so I don't know what happened. He must have been a rogue student because he really went off the reservation and just, spoke the truth. He just basically said what everybody with two brain cells to rub together is thinking, but that a lot of people don't dare to say. And that is, first of all, most of these so-called refugees coming across the border are not refugees. They threaten the Christian foundations of Western civilization, and that's the agenda. And the agenda is to abolish nation states. And he said all these things openly. And, I think it actually goes right along perfectly with what Debbie was just explaining. The sustainability agenda is at its core the exact same thing. In the book of Genesis, God tells people to, be fruitful, to multiply, to subdue the earth, right? And what do the environmentalists say? Don't have children. We need to abolish humanity, right? Humanity is a plague on the earth. And actually, I was at the same sustainability summit in Rio, and the image that's forever going to be ingrained into my mind, the same summit that Debbie was at, is this poster they had there. It was this anthropomorphic earth, right? It was an earth with a sad face, and he had the thermometer sticking out of the mouth and the thing on the forehead to show he had a fever. And the doctor comes up and he says, "Oh, I know what's your problem. You have humans." So that's really the attitude that these people have. And, if you think about it, that's the exact same attitude that the devil has. Humanity is made in God's image. God gave us instructions here. He gave us rights. He gave us responsibilities. And there are very determined, very wicked people who want to turn that all upside down and tell us, don't be fruitful, don't multiply. Mother Earth has rights. You're a plague on Mother Earth. And there's a few, bastions of what had been at one time Christian civilization, that's very quickly eroding. We have, here in the United States, we see the assault as well, but in Europe, of course, was what was considered Christendom for thousands of years. And what Viktor Orban said is they're trying to abolish that, and he's exactly right. They want to get rid of the nation states, and who created the nation states? God created the nations, right? He separated the nations and created the languages. So anything that they can do that opposes God, that opposes what's right, that opposes what's good, they will do, because their agenda is very clear. They want a global system in which they're in control, and we're either dead or we're under their control. It's, you put it very well when you said this is for the whole enchilada. If we lose this, it's going to be unthinkable, right? But I think on the bright side, we know who wins, right? We can go to the end of the book and we can see who wins. So I think that's the brightest spot on the horizon. And in the meantime, there might be, or I should say there will be, a lot of pain and suffering. We see right now civilization is kind of imploding all around us, right? How much longer do people think this absolute lunacy coming out of Washington, D.C., coming out of Brussels, coming out of the United Nations can go on? It can't go on indefinitely. It's going to lead to its logical conclusion if we don't stand up and stop it. So, I don't think there's cause for us to be in a panic or for us to, get depressed or anything like that. It's an exciting time to be alive. But we have a responsibility to get busy. We have a responsibility to do something about it. We have a responsibility to expose evil and to not collaborate with evil. So, there's no excuse to sit on the couch and to do nothing. Everybody can do something, and everybody needs to be doing something.
I'm just thrilled that there are people like you and Debbie out there that are promoting this stuff. I'm mid-60s, and I call you people young people. You are young people to me, for sure.
Alex is young.
Well, you are too, Debbie. But I have to say, that's the key to this thing, is to try to get more young people involved, because they are the key to the future. And it really frightens me that we have so many young people that have bought this program hook, line, and sinker, and are following along like sheeple to this crazy dynamic known as global warming theory or climate change theory, whatever you want to call it, and buying off on this collectivism.
America, I often talk about their Green to Deep Green website, where now they can get a sustainability merit badge. And how do you get a sustainability merit badge? Well, there's lots of ways you can do it, but one of the ways is you take a list of all the things that your family is buying that is considered unsustainable in the 21st century, which is just about everything, as we know from the Global Biodiversity Assessment Report. Everything from, anything that serves human needs to religion is considered unsustainable according to the United Nations. And then these Boy Scouts are supposed to go to their Boy Scout leader and say, hey, here's my list. And then they have a conversation. They have a dialogue about how to approach your family about their consumerism habits, and then to teach them how to change their behavior to be more responsible for Mother Earth. And, and I called Boy Scouts of America. They even quote Gru Harlem Brundtland, the Brundtland Commission, in their terminology of sustainable development. It is word for word the United Nations. And I called them up and said, hey, do you know that you're quoting the United Nations that does not believe in private property rights and sovereignty? And they hung up on me. I called them back 2 more times. They hung up on me. Finally, one of the managers said, had a conversation, sort of a conversation with me, and told me before he hung up on me, you need to read our website. And luckily I got in. You need to read your website. Then he hung up on me. But, and that's even doing some kind of action. It's little things like that I keep doing, whether it's, tweeting to Fox News correspondents that we are not a democracy. I'm hearing more and more from Fox News that we are a democracy. It's extraordinary. Mm-hmm. But little things like that, I say educate, and I think education is key. Hitler thought education was key. He said, he who owns the youth gains the future. Well, how do they gain the youth? Through education. So
through education, and we had that discussion last week. And guys, I hate to do this, but we're at the end of our program. I want to give you very quickly an opportunity to discuss your websites and the information that you have, and some of the things that you're doing very quickly. Thank you.
I'll go first because I'm really quick. You can find out more about what I'm up to at technocracy.news. We are in a technocratic era. It's a scientific dictatorship where the science is already settled, so don't worry your pretty little heads anymore. We'll take care of you. So technocracy.news is where, Dan, you can get a hold of me.
Okay, Alex.
Go ahead, Dan.
No, I go ahead and give the information. And incidentally, I have to do a plug for the New American magazine, which Alex writes a lot of articles on there, and he is a terrific writer. So anyway, turn it to you.
Oh, thanks very much, Dan. I appreciate it. The reason I love the New American, the reason I write for the New American is because I think it is the single best publication in the United States right now in terms of finding out the truth, finding out the agenda, and finding out what you can do about it. So I highly recommend it to people. Subscribe to the magazine. If you aren't a subscriber, you can always check us out online, but you won't get all the articles there. And the print magazine is a really good tool for you to use with other people. If people want to connect with me, my email address is usually listed at the bottom of my articles in the New American. I also write for some other publications, including WorldNet Daily and some others. I have a few books out. One of them, speaking of education, right? We were just talking about education. It really is the key. We're going to win this or lose this based on education, and I'd love to talk further on that some other day. But the book is Crimes of the Educators: How Utopians Are Using Government Schools to Destroy America's Children. And I promise you, after you read the book, you'll realize that the title is not hyperbole. I co-wrote that with Dr. Blumenfeld, who had been he passed away last year, but he was in this fight for 50 years. He did a lot of the original research into what had happened with our education system. And the other book, World Federalism 101, in their own words and deeds, you can find them on Amazon or wherever you want to buy your books from. And, if you have something to send me, I encourage you to do that. And thanks again, Dan and Debbie, both of you, very much for everything you do, and keep up the great work.
Well, I thank you guys, and we'll continue this conversation again on another show at a later date. And, Kelby, with that, I will turn the show over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That is going to conclude the Connecting the Dots show with Dan Happel. We appreciate you guys coming on these calls every week. We'll see you next Thursday, 6 p.m. Pacific. God bless, and good night.
It was 1776 when the founders signed the writ of independence from the Brits. It was revolution. Now an enemy from within would enslave us all again and deprive us of our rights in the Constitution. Restore the Republic. Wake up, it's time to understand. Restore the Republic. We're losing our freedom in the land.